Chicago's Morning Answer continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan, and in for Amy J this morning, John Cass, the illustrious John Cass, johncassnews.com.
Living the dream.
I'm interested in your take on the H-1B visa controversy, John Cass. But before we get that, let me offer up this anecdote that I think is a fair representation of people who believe that the H-1B visa is a zero-sum game. And I'm not one of them. But I'll present the argument.
All right.
James Dixon is a podcaster in Michigan, so he gives a Michigan example, which is a fair representation of the same sort of example you could give in Illinois. Here's what he writes. The H-1B program is costing you and your grandchildren. The great replacement is not a theory anymore. In Michigan, you could say it's our lived experience. Here's how it works. A company, let's say Whirlpool, wants to hire senior software engineers to work out of its Benton Harbor headquarters. It hires engineers through a third party. Some make $70,000 a year, others make $80,000. But the going rate for a senior software engineer in West Michigan is well above $100,000. H-1B workers filling those roles make a lot less money. That means one of two things. Both are bad for Michigan natives. It could mean that the engineer is not actually senior and that he is filling an early career role that could go to one of the 5,000 new college graduates who leave Michigan every summer in search of the good jobs we supposedly don't have. Or it could mean that the engineer actually is senior and hiring an American of comparable skill would cost a lot more money. For 2 decades now, we've lamented Michigan's brain drain problem. Every year, thousands of our new college graduates take their degrees and earning potential to other states. If there was only something we could do to keep them. He goes on to say, without the ability to import skilled workers, these firms say they can't compete. This has been the argument on behalf of the H-1B visa program. So since 2011, Michigan has taken in some 181,000 workers on H-1B visas. Just last year, Michigan took in another 11,600, according to CIS, Citizenship and Immigration Services. We're told these H-1Bs are top talents, but most people who've worked alongside an H-1B will tell you different. Foreign credentials are easily faked or exaggerated. H-1Bs often need training on their arrival, often the very people they will be replacing. India, as Trump might say, does not send their best. Meanwhile, Michigan is sending away our best and brightest. Some kids will always leave Michigan, but too many feel they have no choice if every company that takes in H-1B workers instead offers 3-year fellowships to Michigan natives. We wouldn't have brain drain, and these companies wouldn't have a skills gap. He goes on to say H-1Bs are the easy way out. It's not just cheap labor. It's the cheapening of labor. It's the same mentality that made Michigan the biggest loser of globalization. Well, this is, I think you're looking at one variable, and there's a lot of other ones. I mean, Illinois has the same brain drain, but I would say that the problem with Michigan, and to a greater extent Illinois, if you're talking about brain drain, is there are states that have attacked business, generally speaking, and so kids going to college go to places where there's economic opportunity, and it is so much more the overarching policy of states like Michigan and Illinois that are losing population, generally speaking, where other states similarly situated in the Midwest are not. They're growing. The companies in Indiana and Ohio, they can access the H-1B visa program too, and I'm sure they do. I don't have the numbers in front of me, and yet they're growing. So there's something unique to Illinois in particular, and Michigan to a lesser extent, that that way eclipses the H-1B visa program. And this is a little bit of scapegoating going on, number one. Number two, there's a philosophy behind it that I just reject, which is that we should be in the business of telling businesses who they can and can't hire or what they can and cannot pay. If a business is hiring somebody for a particular position that is subpar, then that business will suffer as a result just to save money. They could be penny wise and pound foolish. Businesses make bad decisions they think are in the interest of the bottom line, and they may not be. Another business will invest in somebody that they think is a better person in that particular title, that they have to pay a little bit more, but they expect to get better returns because of better work product. How is it that we are in the business of telling businesses their business? That's the position of the left. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Steve Corte, our old friend, brother in town, Steve Corte, who is the president of the League of American Workers now, and you can get his musings at stevecortes.substack.com. Steve, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, good morning, John. Good morning, Dan.
Hey, Steve.
So you have penned a piece on this H-1B visa program, and my takeaway is you're not talking about scrapping it altogether the way that Steve Bannon is, but you want to impose more rigorous strictures on its usage.
Well, more strict. I mean, look, if I were the king, I would get away with it entirely. But I don't think that that's possible. I'm a practical guy in politics, so what is possible? Well, it needs to be massively reformed, and it needs to return to its original intention, which was to bring the best and brightest. That's not happening right now. But to back up for a second before I get to that part about, what makes sense as a reform, I think, Dan, what you're missing in your analysis is that America is not a company, right? It's not all about growing our top line. Growing our top line when you don't have shared and diffused prosperity and power does not make for a just country. It doesn't make for an enjoyable country. We have a shared culture, a heritage, ideals. We have a homeland. We're a family. We're a national family. We're not a company. So it's different. It's not.
We're a national family.
It's not all about growing the top line, and we're not telling businesses which Americans they can hire, but we are saying you have to hire Americans predominantly. And if you want to hire a foreigner over an American, then there has to be a major obstacle to get over, meaning money, meaning you have to pay that person because if they're truly exceptional, and what I put forward in my article is if they're truly exceptional, if this is about bringing in the Elon Musks and the Einsteins, then pay them $250,000 a year, which is a little more than 3 times the median family income in the United States. And
you're going to decide.
$50,000.
You'll decide what they're going to get, right?
How is that different than a minimum wage? Do you support minimum wage laws?
No, I'm saying that's apples and oranges.
No, it's not. It's government set price setting.
No,
I mean, you're talking about like an
foreigners,
American
Dan.
family.
For foreigners.
I understand.
I prioritize Americans.
I understand, but I mean, you're talking about power being diffuse, and the way to diffuse power is to centralize it. Rather than the decision being made at the business level, it's made at the federal government level.
The way to diffuse power is to protect American workers and American industries because we have a vital interest, social, economic, and otherwise, in making sure that we have prosperous main streets in this country and that we have a middle class that is vibrant. And we don't have that right now. And one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons we don't have a vibrant middle class is because upper middle class workers, people who aren't wealthy, make a good wage, an accountant who makes $80,000, $90,000, they're being replaced en masse by Indians who are willing to come in and do it for $40,000 or $50,000. And that does not serve the long-term interest of the United States. It serves the interest of massive corporations, but not America, not our cohesion as a society, not our happiness, not our long-term success. And look, the most vibrant eras of American history have been some of the eras of lowest immigration. I would argue incredibly, right? If you look at the 1950s, for example, which I think most people would agree was probably the golden era of American history, the foreign-born population got all the way down below 5%. We're now back above 15% at an all-time high. We're back we're above the levels of the Industrial Revolution when the need for human labor was almost insatiable. Does that make sense for the United States, both legal and illegal immigration? I don't believe it does. And so I think immigration restrictionism is actually an incredibly important part of the populist right movement of prioritizing America. And to me, it's enlightened populist nationalism.
Well,
clearing my throat because
go ahead, John.
I'm a product of immigrants. My parents were immigrants. My father was not an educated man. He was a peasant. He was basically almost illiterate. He would not have passed any of these standards. And yet he provided for his sons to go to university, whatever university they wanted to go to, because he had what was counted. He had a pair, right? He had a pair, and that is what you don't test on any equation that I'm seeing right now.
All right, I get all that. My father was an immigrant too.
If you want to protect the American workers, in my view, I could be wrong. You know, I don't know if I'm always right. I could be wrong, but in your heart, you know I'm right.
Okay.
No, I don't. Listen, my
yeah,
father was an immigrant too, and grew up on a farm, so similar kind of story, farm in Colombia in South America. Here's the thing. Immigration exists to serve the interests of the citizens of the United States, whether those citizens are native-born or legally naturalized. Immigration is not a good in and of itself. There have been times in American history which immigration has served us very well. Most of those times, we didn't have a social safety net, and we demanded assimilation. Neither of those two factors are at play right now. In fact, quite the opposite, right? They're not assimilating at all. Some of them are incredibly dangerous, as we just saw with terror attacks in the United States. And so it's an entirely different equation, not to mention with the advent of automation and robotics and AI, the need for human labor, if anything, is probably going to decline significantly in the coming years, which to me further reduces the idea that we should be importing hundreds of thousands of foreign workers to replace Americans. But again, I think that there's a mistake, and I think we're borrowing the less narrative when we assume that immigration is some sort of inherent good. It's not. It can be good. It can be very bad, right? And it depends how it's done.
Well, of course it depends how it's done. No, nobody's arguing for open borders and, whoever can come when they want on their own terms. Nobody's saying that. I mean, I'm all for having people waive away welfare state benefits to, improve their position in terms of emigrating to this country, and and other such restrictions, of course. But the idea that that immigration of productive people who are going to be self-sustaining and add value to the country isn't part of America's secret sauce is absurd. It manifestly is, and it always has been. So
I think that presumes a view of America that we are basically a corporation, and we're not. It's more than about growing the top line. It's about our culture. It's about our social cohesion. We're a very sick country in many ways right now. We're literally sick in a lot of ways, very unhealthy, very unhappy. At least part of that, I believe, is mass migration, and I think it's a major part of it. And the American people know this. They're waking up to it, which is one of the reasons that they're backing the America First movement and backing, complete border sovereignty, but not just border sovereignty, also clamping down on legal migration, which, again, at this level, it serves the interests of big business, but it doesn't serve the interests of regular people. It doesn't serve the interests of Main Street.
We're in Illinois where our students cannot read or write. They're functionally illiterate in Illinois. In Michigan, I would say the same. And even those who are at grade level in some other red state, grade level is nothing. Grade level is not doesn't give you a gold star in your forehead. That just means you're C average. You're not producing anything. We have to have a discussion about merit in the country.
Sure.
And and the people from overseas who are serious students are adding value, in my view.
Look, I take your point, but my response would be, again, if you think of our country as a family, if you're having problems with your family member, you don't say, "Well, I'm just going to replace you." No, I want to fix this. All right, you know what I mean? I want to make you better. I want to create the environment and the incentives for you to do better. That's what the United States should be doing.
So,
Not saying we're going to replace you with foreigners because you're problematic, because we created a corrupt system here.
First of all, that assumes that this is zero sum, which I reject. I mean, economics is not a zero sum game. That's number one. I have a job, so you don't have a job. That's not true. There's a concept called growth. And I mean, there's plenty of studies that suggest that immigration actually produces more job opportunities. It produces more patents. It produces growth.
Yeah.
That's number one. Number two, American software engineers, the U.S. citizens are software engineers. They can't compete with Indian nationals who are software engineers or Chinese nationals who are software engineers.
They shouldn't have to for their job. They shouldn't have to. And let me give you an analogy. Okay, so let's say, Naperville Little League. Okay, they have a house league, and then they have a travel team. Now, to compete to make that travel team, that young boy or young girl, they shouldn't have to compete against baseball players, softball players from everywhere, from the entire country. No, they compete against Naperville. Why? Because it's a community, and the community matters. And because people are supporting it with their time, with their money, with their effort, right? So it matters. The same is true for the United States. A U.S. worker should not have to compete against the world for their skills. That defies any definition of what a country is. Why do we have a country at all then?
So we should have nobody immigrate. We should have no immigration.
I'm for a moratorium on immigration. Yes, I am, but that's not practical. What I'm saying is I'm taking Elon Musk's word.
Your philosophical position is actually no immigration ever, because no American worker should be able. You just said no American worker should have to compete for their job. That would mean no immigration ever across the board.
Well, I'm not saying ever. I think there are times that immigration serves us. There are times it doesn't serve us very well at all. For example, right now in Los Angeles County, the biggest county in America, the majority of immigrant-headed households are on welfare, are getting some sort of means-tested benefit. Okay, that tells me we're not doing immigration correctly, right?
Well, we all stipulate to that. Nobody is supporting that. We stipulate to that. We're not talking about that. We're talking about people who are not going to be dependents of the state.
Okay, well, and I'm saying that to absorb the immigrants we have, and it's not just economic, though, by the way, it's also cultural, because they're not assimilating.
Well, that's another issue. Yes.
It would make sense for us to take a pause. It really would make sense and we've done it before in our history. We basically had no immigrants in this country almost none, from 1924 until the mid-1960s. Happened to be one of the most prosperous periods in American history. I don't think that's coincidence. It makes sense for us after massive periods of immigration, which we just had under Biden, right, both legal and illegal. It makes sense for us to take a time out and say, okay, let's absorb these immigrants. Let's make sure that they become Americans, that they assimilate. Let's make sure that it makes sense economically for the United States, and then we can restart immigration in a smart way. Like I don't know why that's unreasonable at all.
Well, I mean, just a point of order. I mean, that golden period you keep pointing to, it was post World War II, the industrialization in part, and also for 25 years in the period you just mentioned, from 24 to 60. You had 4.5 million people in the Bracero program who were temporary workers in this country. So you did have immigration.
Right. Well, and we also removed them very swiftly and very harshly in the 1950s under President Eisenhower.
Yeah, I don't agree with the harshness, but the point is that was part of the conversation about that period you chose as a halcyon period where there was no immigration. That's not true.
Yeah. Well, there was very little. And look, what I'm saying is
4.5 million guest workers.
Who were then kicked out.
Well, okay.
Then kicked out of the United States, and much to Eisenhower's credit.
Yeah,
right?
but you don't want those 4.5 million people because they were competing with American workers.
No, that's correct. I think it is time for a pause in this country. It makes economic sense. It makes social and cultural sense. It makes political sense. It is time for a pause. This country, part of why we are unhappy and unhealthy is because of mass migration. And the idea that upper middle class Americans, these aren't, again, we're not bringing in geniuses. That's just a complete false narrative, right? I mean, are there some? Of course, but in mass, right, this is people willing to do a job that Americans are fully capable of doing, but simply demand a higher salary.
How much of this involves antipathy toward Elon Musk and Ramaswamy and a political, game of climbing up over them?
Listen, I'm really pro
Musk.
I'm not sure we have this amazing victory that we earned on November 5th without Elon Musk, right? With what he did in making Twitter X a free speech platform, truly free speech, where we could share information, where we could debunk the many hoaxes of the corporate media, where we could openly debate, openly attack bad ideas. I mean, I don't think we win without it. So I give absolute tremendous credit to Elon Musk, not to mention the personal money he spent, which was significant on the election. So I'm not anti-Musk. I just happen to disagree with him on this idea. But by the way, I'm not even sure I really do. It depends. I mean, he's made so many statements, but one of his statements was that he says we want the 0.1. And he said, yes, he agrees with me on minimums. Now, he didn't say what the minimum salary should be. I doubt he would say it should be as high as I believe. But he did say we want the 0.1 and we need minimum salaries. So in that sense, I'm agreeing with Musk. And that's why I wrote this piece, because I believe that is a reasonable compromise between the populist nationalists who want no immigration and the more international business crowd that wants, a generous allowance for H-1B. I'm saying, to me, the compromise roughly in the middle is to say, okay, you can do H-1Bs, but it's got to cost you. And then okay, they're bringing in a surgeon who's going to add, who has incredible talents that may not be found in the United States or in that specific area of the United States, who can add tremendous economic benefits. They're not bringing in an accountant or a sort of line IT worker who's just going to replace an American for cheaper, but not actually grow the American economic pie. And so to me, a minimum standard makes a lot of sense. If you want to bring these foreigners in, you have to pay for it. It's essentially a tariff on people is what I'm talking about. And I would suspect both of you are probably anti-tariff, but I'm not. I'm pro-tariff on goods and on people.
Steve Cortes, he is the president of League of American Workers. He writes at stevecortes.substack.com. Steve, thanks for joining us. Good debate.
I appreciate it. Have a great day.
And he joined us in the Turnkey.pro answer line.
News, opinion, insight. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Hi, everyone. If you've been injured in an accident that was not your fault,